Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Imagine opening your eyes before the sun even thinks about rising, in a room so cold that your breath forms faint little clouds when you exhale. The blanket wrapped around you holds the last bit of warmth from sleep. And for a few seconds, you stay completely still, trying to gather the courage to leave its safety. It is early, too early for the adults to be awake, but something powerful pulls you from the bed. It is Christmas morning, in the 1950 seconds. Outside your window, frost paints delicate patterns across the glass, turning the world into a quiet canvas of white. The air is crisp enough that touching the floor feels like stepping into a winter stream, but even that sharp cold can't dampen the excitement humming inside your chest. You pull your flannel pajamas close, rub your eyes, and let the realization settle in. The day you waited for all year has finally arrived. And somehow, the cold makes it feel even more real. The house is silent, the kind of deep silence that only exists before dawn. Every creak of the wooden floorboard sounds like it might wake the entire neighborhood. You move carefully, steadying yourself on familiar furniture in the dimness, learning once again which parts of the hallway are safe to step on and which parts groan too loudly. The living room is still dark, but you can sense the presence of the tree even before you see it. There is a faint glow coming from around the corner, not bright enough to illuminate the whole house, but enough to hint at magic waiting behind the doorway. Those old-fashioned incandescent lights, warm and uneven, blink in their own rhythm as if dreaming. You pause at the top of the stairs and listen. The radiator has not kicked in yet, and the air hugs your skin with a chill that feels strangely comforting. The scent of pine drifts from the living room, mixing with the lingering smell of last night's fireplace and something faintly sweet that you can't quite identify. It is the unmistakable fragrance of a mid-century holiday, part nature, part hearth, part anticipation. You take a slow breath and step forward, easing down the stairs with the perfected stealth of a child who has practiced the art of quiet movement every December for years. There is a specific stair that squeaks louder than the others. You know exactly which one it is, and you skip it automatically, proud of the small victory. At the bottom, the living room reveals itself in a soft, dreamlike haze. The tree stands confidently in the corner, decorated not with sleek modern ornaments, but with the heavy, delicate glass pieces that families treated like treasure. Shiny red balls, painted silver spirals, small bells, and the kind of fragile ornaments that become heirlooms over time catch the faint light and glow. Tinsel drapes across the branches in messy, shimmering strands, each one reflecting the blinking bulbs in tiny bursts of color. These are not LEDs that stay cool to the touch. These are warm little bulbs that hum gently, making the tree feel almost alive. They flicker, they buzz faintly, and for a child of the 1950 seconds, they hold the same wonder as fireworks. Beneath the branches sits a cluster of wrapped gifts. Some are uneven, some are perfectly square, and all of them are covered in paper, printed with stars, stripes, bells, or frosted patterns that feel timeless. The ribbons are stiff, the corners are sharp, and the tape peels a little at the edges. Each package is a question, a possibility, a tiny universe of excitement. Even the smallest one feels significant in this quiet, glowing moment. But there is a rule in many households back then: no touching presents until the parents wake up. And so, with the self-control of someone holding back a tidal wave, you stand and admire instead of reaching out. You glance down the hallway toward your parents' bedroom. The door is closed. There is no movement inside. They are still asleep, unaware of the electricity buzzing quietly through the house. So you wait. You settle on the carpet near the tree, wrapping your arms around your knees to stay warm, letting the lights dance across your face. This is the kind of waiting that feels long and short at the same time, the kind that fills the room with a soft, hopeful energy. Every once in a while, you tilt your head toward the kitchen, listening for the beginning of adult activity. Parents, in the 1,950 seconds, did not wake to the tap of a smartphone or the glow of an alarm clock display. They woke slowly, naturally, stretching beneath heavy blankets, wondering why the morning felt a little more special than usual. Eventually, there is a sound. A soft cough, the rustling of sheets, the unmistakable thump of slippers hitting the floor. You hold your breath. Another sound follows the shifting of weight, the creak of a bed frame, and finally, the slow swing of a door opening. You stand up quickly but quietly, trying not to look too eager in case someone sees you. The familiar scent of coffee begins to travel through the house, warm and deep, and it feels like a small signal from the universe that the day is finally allowed to begin. In most 1,950 seconds homes, coffee came from a metal percolator, rising in bubbling waves, filling the kitchen with a comforting rhythm. It is a smell that meant adults were awake. And awake adults meant Christmas could officially start. You hear your parents' voices soft at first, then a little more awake, exchanging simple morning words. Maybe they mention the chill in the house, or laugh at how early you are up, pretending to be surprised, even though they knew it would happen. They enter the living room slowly, still wrapped in the last traces of sleep, holding mugs that warm their hands. Their eyes land on you, then on the tree, and a smile spreads across their faces. They know this moment. They have lived it before. They savor it every year. "All right," one of them says with a gentle sigh that is half amusement, half affection. "Let us see what is waiting under that tree." That sentence alone feels like the opening chord of a favorite song. Your heart lifts so quickly it almost aches, and in that surge of joy, the cold suddenly disappears. The house feels warm, even though the temperature has not changed. The tree looks brighter, the gifts look larger, and the air seems to shimmer. This is Christmas morning, the version people remember decades later, when the details grow softer, but the feeling stays bright. You move closer to the tree with reverence, knowing that this moment, these first minutes, are part of a ritual that families in the 1,950 seconds shared across the country. It was not about extravagance or perfection. It was not about complicated traditions or meticulously curated holiday scenes. It was about the quiet wonder of waking up to a room transformed by lights, pine, and hope. It was the gentle magic of seeing your parents smile at the same things that make you smile. It was the simple truth that even a cold house can feel warm when joy spreads through it. And long after the presents are unwrapped and the paper is tossed into a pile, long after breakfast is cooked and visitors arrive, this moment, this first breath of a 1,950 seconds Christmas morning remains the heart of the day. Because it is not about what is inside the boxes. It is about the feeling of stepping into something special before the world fully wakes. It is about that quiet glow in the corner of the living room and the sense that time has paused just long enough for you to feel something beautiful. That is the doorway into our journey tonight. A child waking before dawn, a house still dreaming, a tree shimmering quietly, and a day filled with possibility. This is where the story of the 1,950 seconds Christmas truly begins. The Christmas tree in a 1,950 seconds home was more than decoration. It was the emotional center of the entire holiday, a living memory preserved in pine needles, shimmering lights, and ornaments that carried stories. As the parents eased into the living room with their warm cups of coffee, and the child stood in that soft glow of excitement, the tree took on a presence of its own, almost like a gentle guardian of the season. Unlike the perfectly symmetrical, pre-lit trees of today, the 1952 Christmas tree was wonderfully imperfect. It leaned ever so slightly, its branches uneven, its needles prickly and stubborn, its personality unmistakable. And yet, in that glowing morning hush, it looked like the most magical thing in the world. The parents always had a story about the tree. Maybe they had struggled with the stand the night before, tightening screws that never quite held evenly, or cutting the trunk just a bit too short so the tree wobbled when someone walked by. In many families, the annual battle of the tree stand was as much a tradition as the holiday itself. But once the lights were plugged in, none of those small frustrations mattered. The lights transformed everything. These were not the cool-toned, perfectly calibrated bulbs we see now. These were warm little spheres of color, reds like glowing embers, greens soft as moss, blues and yellows that seemed to pulse gently in the dim room. Each bulb carried a faint hum, the kind of sound you barely notice until the house becomes completely quiet. And tinsel shiny, impossible to control tinsel draped across the branches like rivers of silver. In the 1950 seconds, tinsel came in long strands that clung to everything: sweaters, carpets, and even pets. Kids hung it one piece at a time, aiming for elegance, but usually creating small festive storms. By Christmas morning, some strands clung sideways, others drooped dramatically, and a few rested on the floor like lost ribbons. But all together, they caught the lights in a way nothing else could. If you stood close enough, the reflections seemed to stretch and scatter, as if tiny pieces of stardust had drifted into the house overnight. The ornaments themselves were treasures. Families did not buy new ones every year. They kept them, repaired them, treasured them. Glass ornaments in pale pinks, deep reds, icy blues, and shimmering golds hung from metal hooks that bent slowly over time. Some ornaments had glittering stripes, others featured delicate hand-painted scenes, and a few had small imperfections, tiny scratches or chips from years of being handled with the unsteady hands of excited children. But these imperfections did not lessen their charm. If anything, they added a layer of family history to the tree. Each ornament carried a memory: the year someone dropped one and cried, the year the family cat knocked 3 off the branches, the year a favorite ornament survived a fall against all odds. Near the top of the tree, just below the uneven star or worn-out angel, hung the most sentimental pieces. Sometimes it was a homemade ornament, a cardboard circle wrapped with yarn, a school project that had aged into a kind of soft nostalgia. In other homes, it was something inherited from a grandparent, kept high enough to avoid the hands of curious children. Light reflected differently on these objects, as if the tree knew they held stories worth preserving. As the child approached the tree, standing just close enough to feel the faint warmth of the bulbs, something magical happened. The light seemed brighter, the colors deeper, and the room suddenly felt smaller and cozier, like the tree had pulled the entire family into its glow. Even the smallest twinkle from a bulb felt significant. It was not just decoration, it was atmosphere, memory, and emotion all woven together. The child tilted their head, mesmerized by the gentle blinking of the lights, the silver shimmer of tinsel, and the way the ornaments created soft reflections on the walls and ceiling. The parents watched quietly. They knew the tree was not perfect. They knew one of the strings of lights flickered on and off unpredictably, and that the branch holding the heaviest ornament dipped lower than it should. But they also knew that the beauty of the tree was not in its precision. It was in the feeling it created, the way it made the house feel alive, the way it made everyone breathe a little slower, the way it anchored the entire holiday in a warm, glowing center. If you listened carefully, you could hear the soft crackle of the bulbs warming. You could hear the faint rustle of tinsel whenever someone walked by, or the gentle shifting of branches settling into their natural positions. For a moment, the world outside, the cold, the snow, the stillness, felt far away. The living room became its own small universe filled with color and light. Sometimes, in the middle of admiring the tree, the child would notice something new, an ornament they had somehow overlooked the night before, or a gift partially hidden behind a lower branch. They might crouch down just to see the tree from below, watching how the branches overlapped like layers of a forest canopy. The smell of pine, strong and vivid, reminded them that this tree had once lived outside, touched by wind and snow. Now it stood in the warm center of the home, carrying its own quiet history into the heart of the celebration. What made 1952's Christmas trees special was not just the ornaments or the lights, it was the way families put themselves into the process. The decorating was a group effort. Children placed ornaments exactly at eye level, resulting in a cluster of decorations in the middle section. Parents rearranged a few pieces afterward, trying not to break the illusion that the kids had done it perfectly. The top branches were always a bit bare, simply because no one could reach them without a chair. And sometimes, even with the chair, it felt like too much trouble. The tree became a reflection of the family, uneven, sentimental, filled with mismatched memories that somehow worked together beautifully. When the lights were turned on for the first time each year, everyone paused. Even if disagreements had happened earlier that day, even if someone was frustrated about tangled wires or forgotten ornaments, the moment the tree lit up seemed to wash everything in calm. It was a glowing reminder that despite imperfections, the family had created something magical together. On Christmas morning, that magic felt even stronger. With the room still dim and quiet, the tree shone like a lighthouse, guiding the family into the holiday. Its presence said, "This is your place. This is your moment. This is the heart of your celebration." And throughout the day, as wrapping paper collected on the floor and the scent of cooking drifted through the house, the tree remained steady. Its lights blinked softly, its ornaments swayed gently, and its tinsel shimmered with every movement of air. In the 1950 seconds, the Christmas tree was not a backdrop for photos, it was the emotional anchor of the entire season. Families gathered around it not just to open gifts, but to talk, to laugh, to simply be together. The tree created a space where time seemed to slow. Conversations felt warmer, smiles lasted longer, and memories formed almost effortlessly. Even now, for those who lived through those years, the image of that glowing tree stands out more clearly than many other childhood memories. The quiet beauty of a 1950 seconds tree was not about perfection. It was about intention, about love, about presence. It was about families coming together in a gentle, glowing space where even the coldest winter morning felt warm. Standing there in the soft light, with the world outside still asleep, it was impossible not to feel that something special was unfolding, something woven from tradition, imagination, and the simple joy of being together. That tree, in all its shimmering imperfection, was not just a holiday decoration. It was the symbol of the season itself. And for children and adults alike, it became the gateway into a day filled with wonder. In many 1,950 American homes, before any gifts under the tree were touched, there was an unwritten ritual that every child felt deep in their bones: checking the Christmas stockings. These stockings were not elaborate pieces of decor shaped like cartoon characters or embroidered with metallic thread. They were simple, often made of thick wool or felt, sometimes handmade, sometimes passed down through siblings. They hung from the mantel or a nearby shelf with a quiet sense of pride, waiting patiently through the night for small treasures to fill their soft, slightly stretched shape. By the time morning arrived, their rounded forms hinted at mysteries inside, tiny bulges offering the first clues. When a child approached their stocking, the excitement was gentle but intense. There was something profoundly personal about it. This was the first gift of the day, the one that felt closest to the heart. The living room was still glowing softly from the tree lights, and as the child's fingers curled around the top of the stocking, the wool felt slightly cool to the touch. Slowly, carefully, they reached inside, anticipating the familiar texture of candy, fruit, or something small enough to hide in a pocket. The first items were almost always sweet. Candy canes wrapped in crinkling cellophane, peppermint discs stuck together in little clusters, or small chocolate figurines shaped like bells or stars. The chocolate often had a slightly waxy scent, a signature of mid-century candy production. And yet, to a child, it smelled like holiday dreams. Some stockings held little boxes of raisins or an inexpensive toy trinket, a tiny whistle, a painted wooden top, a metal jack set, or a miniature tin soldier standing at attention. Deeper inside the stocking, the child's hand might brush against walnuts or pecans. These were not just treats, they were tradition. Nuts had been part of winter celebrations for generations, long before the age of packaged snacks. Parents remembered cracking them by the fireplace when they were children, and they passed that memory forward without much thought, trusting the ritual to speak for itself. And then, of course, there was the orange. The famous orange that appeared in American Christmas stockings for decades. Sometimes a tangerine, sometimes a navel orange. Its bright peel shone like a tiny sun buried among simpler gifts. To modern eyes, an orange might seem unremarkable, but in the 1,950 seconds, it carried meaning. It was a symbol of winter abundance, a small luxury, a treat that felt both everyday and special. Its scent was fresh and invigorating, a burst of citrus that contrasted with the warm pine and sweet chocolate in the room. The child would pull each item out slowly, savoring the moment, arranging them on the carpet in a small, proud display. Parents watched with soft smiles, sipping their coffee and enjoying the simple delight unfolding. This ritual was peaceful, calm, and filled with innocence. The stocking was not about extravagance, it was about surprise. It was about discovering joy in small, tangible forms. And it was always the beginning. Once the stocking was emptied, the child would hold it up and shake it lightly, just in case something tiny was lost in the toe. Sometimes a coin would fall out, landing with a soft clink. Sometimes nothing. But the gesture itself was part of the ritual, a final check before the stocking was hung back in its place to rest after another year of faithful service. As the child admired their collection of simple treasures, they felt something that did not have a name but was unmistakable. It was the feeling of enough. The satisfaction of receiving small things that made the day brighter without overwhelming the moment. The 1,950 seconds. Christmas was not about excess. It was about meaning. It was about knowing that something as modest as a piece of fruit or a handful of candy could shine with importance simply because of when and how it was given. Parents understood this deeply. They had grown up during times when gifts were fewer, simpler, and often homemade. So they passed down the idea that a holiday did not need to overflow in order to feel rich. They watched as their children held their small treasures with care, turning each piece over in their hands as if inspecting tiny artifacts of wonder. After the stockings came the slow build toward the main event, the gifts under the tree. But the stockings set the tone. They grounded the morning in gentle expectation, in the sweetness of small surprises, in the magic of tradition. Even siblings who argued the rest of the year sat side by side on Christmas morning, comparing the contents of their stockings with a kind of quiet camaraderie. One child might have a candy cane that broke in half, while another unwrapped one perfectly preserved. Someone might gain an extra walnut by accident, and these little differences sparked soft laughter and simple sharing. In the dim light of the living room, the shadows played across the carpet as the children leaned over their little piles of treats. The tree lights blinked slowly on the tinsel, causing tiny reflections to dance across the walls like slow-moving stars. Parents sometimes took a photo to freeze this moment forever. A child sitting cross-legged in pajamas, surrounded by the small joys that marked the beginning of the holiday. Once the stockings were finished, the atmosphere shifted. The child's eyes drifted toward the tree again, glancing at the shapes beneath its branches. But there was no rush, not yet. The stocking ritual had softened the pace of the morning. Everyone breathed a little easier. There was a rhythm to how things unfolded, a natural flow that families respected without ever needing to discuss it. Sometimes, before moving to the main gifts, the parents would talk quietly about their own stockings from childhood. Stories about the one time they found a homemade toy, or the year when candy was scarce and the stocking held mostly nuts and fruit. These stories bound generations together, weaving a thread of shared experience that made the present moment feel even richer. The child might listen with half interest, half impatience, but later in life, those stories would glow in their memory. Because the stockings were not just gifts, they were reminders of continuity. They connected households across decades. They whispered the same gentle message every year. Joy does not need to be big to matter. And when the time finally came to move on from the stockings, it did not feel like an abrupt shift. It felt like the natural unfolding of the day. The child gathered their treasures into a neat little pile or placed them in a small bowl nearby, knowing they could return to them throughout the morning. The stocking was hung carefully or laid out on a chair to be refilled next year. The room felt warmer now, not because the furnace had finally caught up, but because the ritual had filled it with shared excitement. In the quiet glow of the lights, the stockings stood as proof that joy could be found in the smallest places. They reminded everyone that magic was not something grand or rare. It was the slow, steady unfolding of tradition, love, and anticipation. And with the stockings complete, the family turned their attention to the heart of the room, the tree, and the gifts beneath it, ready to step into the next moment of Christmas morning, carrying the soft wonder of simple beginnings with them. The moment the family shifted their attention from the stockings to the gifts beneath the tree, the atmosphere of the living room changed in a way that felt almost ceremonial. Until now, the morning had been gentle, soft whispers, quiet footsteps, the slow unfolding of expectation. But with the stockings complete and the tree shimmering confidently in the corner, the energy began to rise like sunlight creeping over the horizon. This was the moment every child waited for, the moment that felt both monumental and comforting, like stepping into a story that continued year after year without ever losing its magic. The gifts under the tree were arranged in a way that only a real family could manage, some leaning, some stacked on others, some hidden behind larger boxes, and a few unexpectedly wedged between the lower branches. Wrapping paper shimmered with mid-century charm, metallic stars, cheerful stripes, modest snowflakes, and cheerful holiday messages printed in slightly faded inks. The colors were not vibrant in a modern sense. They were softer, more muted, almost nostalgic even in their own time. Some presents were perfectly wrapped with sharp corners and precise folds, evidence of a patient hand. Others were hastily taped, corners bunching with wrinkles, the papers straining slightly where someone had mismeasured the size. But all of them held the same promise. The parents settled onto the sofa, mugs of coffee warming their hands, watching with the unmistakable expression of adults who had lived this ritual many times and never grown tired of it. There was pride in their eyes, a soft amusement, and a certain quiet joy that came from the simple act of seeing their child so full of anticipation. They did not rush the moment. The beauty of a 1950 seconds Christmas morning was that it was not about speed, it was about savoring, about letting each layer unfold gently. The child, poised near the tree, waited for that one small phrase that served as both permission and a beginning. Go ahead. And when the words finally came, they landed with the softness of a winter snowfall and the force of a long-awaited celebration. The child moved closer with a mixture of excitement and care, choosing the first present in the way only a child can, instinctively, as if guided not by logic but by the quiet pull of intuition. Maybe it was the gift closest to them. Maybe it was the one wrapped in their favorite color. Maybe it was the one with the slightly crooked bow that hinted at something special. Tearing the paper was a sound everyone recognized. A crinkle, a rip, a cascade of small crackles that filled the room like tiny bursts of joy. The first reveal was always magical, no matter what lay beneath. A board game, a doll with painted lashes and soft curls, a small train set with bright metal tracks, a picture book with thick, glossy pages, or perhaps something handmade, mittens knitted with care, a scarf that still held the faint scent of storage, or a small wooden figure carved by a grandparent. Children of the 1950 seconds did not need extravagant surprise to feel wonder. Even a simple toy could glow with significance. The packaging itself often felt like treasure, cardboard boxes with illustrations that captured the imagination, small instruction booklets printed with cheerful fonts, protective tissue paper folded neatly inside. The child would study these details with reverence before even touching the toy, letting the moment stretch in a way that felt natural and unhurried. Parents watched each reaction, the widening eyes, the shy smile, the intake of breath, like it was a gift for them as well. The living room filled with the soft sounds of appreciation. Look at this. Oh, wow. This is just what I wanted. Spoken in voices that blended excitement with politeness. Because mid-century, families often taught gratitude as an instinct woven into every gesture. The next gift came, and the next, each reveal, creating a small ripple of delight. Some presents were practical socks, in soft wool, pajamas, folded neatly, a pair of slippers, a winter hat. These gifts might not elicit squeals of joy, but they carried a warmth of their own. They represented care, thought, and preparation for the season. Parents often smiled at these items with a different kind of pride, knowing they had chosen something useful, something that would be worn during the cold months ahead. Other gifts were the kind children talked about for months. A toy robot made of metal and bright paint, its arms stiff but full of charm. A cowboy set with a felt hat and small plastic accessories. A kit for assembling miniature buildings or vehicles, inviting hours of imaginative exploration. Dolls with eyes that opened and closed, wrapped in soft dresses. Picture books with stories that sparked dreams of faraway places. The room slowly filled with a growing constellation of toys, clothes, books, and boxes. The child moved from one present to another with the gentle efficiency of someone opening not just gifts, but memories in real time. Each rip of paper added a piece to the morning's quiet symphony. Parents occasionally exchanged amused glances when a particular gift surprised the child more than expected, or when a sibling's present from the previous year was suddenly remembered with fondness and compared to today's treasures. At some point during the unwrapping, the floor became a patchwork of discarded paper, ribbons, and bows. The paper had its own joy, crinkly, colorful, scattered in heaps like a soft snowfall of patterns. Some families saved the nicer pieces, folding them carefully to reuse next year, continuing traditions of carefulness passed down through generations. Others let the paper fall wherever it wanted, embracing the beautiful chaos of the moment. Through it all, the tree remained steady, glowing warmly, casting reflections on the presents and the family gathered around it. Its lights blinked softly, marking time in a way no clock could. The tinsel shimmered more brightly now, catching the light as people moved around the room. The ornaments created small, gentle sparkles, with every shift in the air, as if participating in the celebration. When the last present was opened, there was not a sense of ending, only a sense of fullness. The child sat, surrounded by new treasures, touching each one, arranging them carefully, deciding what to play with first. The parents leaned back on the sofa, relaxing into the moment, feeling the satisfaction that came from seeing joy take shape in such a simple, wholesome way. This was the heart of the 1950 seconds gift opening ritual. Not the quantity of gifts, not the glamour of what lay inside, but the feeling of family gathered in the soft glow of morning, sharing the brief and beautiful moment when time felt both still and generous. It was the sense of being exactly where you needed to be, with exactly the people who mattered. As the child explored each gift more closely, turning a toy over in their hands, flipping through the pages of a book, trying on a new piece of clothing, the room felt alive with gentle contentment. The coffee in the parents' mugs grew cooler. The tree lights blinked in their slow, hypnotic rhythm. The paper on the floor softened beneath small footsteps. And outside, the world was still quiet, as if holding its breath to preserve this peaceful moment. There was no rush to put anything away, no pressure to clean, no urgency to move to the next activity. The beauty of the 1950 seconds Christmas morning was that it allowed space to soak in joy, to savor the scene, to simply be present. The gifts did not distract from the moment, they enhanced it. They were not the center, but rather small points of light orbiting the real core, togetherness. In this soft, glowing room, with new memories forming in the warmth of family presence, the gift opening ritual became something more than tradition. It became a gentle celebration of love, effort, and the quiet hope that a new year would hold just as much wonder. And as the morning stretched toward midday, the child leaned back, surrounded by the comforting clutter of wrapping paper and new treasures, feeling something that did not need words, a feeling that stayed long after the gifts themselves grew old. It was the feeling of Christmas in the 1950 seconds, warm, glowing, gentle, and complete. There is a very particular moment in every 1950 seconds Christmas morning when the excitement of unwrapping presents begins to settle, the living room grows warm with the combined glow of tree lights and family chatter, and the chaos finally pauses long enough for everyone to take a breath. And right there, precisely in that breath, comes the sound. A sigh. A shift. a subtle clearing of the throat, the unmistakable signal that it is time for the annual showdown between Dad and the Christmas tree. No one announces it. No one needs to. The ritual is as old as the holiday itself, at least within the walls of this particular home. The gifts have been opened. The stockings are empty. The children are temporarily occupied with new treasures. And now, inevitably, Dad rises from the sofa with a kind of slow, reluctant determination, as though answering a call only he can hear. The tree, shedding needles in a quiet drizzle onto the carpet, stands nearby like a stubborn opponent preparing for the next round. The living room is a battlefield, disguised in garland and tinsel. The faint scent of pine mixes with coffee, wrapping paper, and whatever last night's dinner left lingering in the air. Dad's robe swishes as he crosses the room, stepping carefully to avoid toys, bows, and the occasional rogue marble that has somehow already escaped from a brand new game. His slippers slide slightly on the worn linoleum, but he stabilizes himself with the dignity of someone who has done this many times before. He surveys the tree with narrowed eyes. It leans slightly to the left today, not a dramatic tilt, but just enough to suggest rebellion. One of the strings of lights flickers irregularly, blinking as if in Morse code, possibly transmitting distress signals to other mid-century trees suffering the same fate. And the metal stand beneath it, battered from previous years of combat, sits unevenly on the carpet like a small creature pretending to be helpful while actually plotting resistance. The children glance over, sensing what is about to unfold, but knowing better than to intervene. This is not their battle. This is Dad's quest, half tradition, half obligation, entirely inevitable. Dad kneels beside the tree, pulling the hem of his robe out of harm's way with a practiced flick. From the coffee table, he retrieves a set of tools that look more symbolic than functional. A dusty wrench that fits nothing in the house, a screwdriver slightly bent from past misuse, and a butter knife borrowed from the kitchen because just in case. These tools are not chosen for precision. They are chosen because they are what Dad always uses. And in Christmas rituals, consistency matters more than logic. With a grunt of mild determination, he places one hand on the tree trunk, steadying it as if trying to coax cooperation from a reluctant dance partner. The tree responds by releasing a shower of pine needles directly into his sleeve. Dad pretends not to notice. He tilts his head, examines the stand, mutters something about these screws never tightening evenly, and wedges the butter knife into a slot that may or may not have been designed for it. Across the room, Mom watches quietly, nursing her coffee like a spectator who has seen this play too many times to be surprised by any outcome. She does not offer advice. She learned long ago that commentary, no matter how practical, can disrupt the delicate psychological balance required for this ritual. Instead, she sips. She observes. She occasionally raises an eyebrow, but says nothing. Dad's first attempt to straighten the tree results in a modest shift, a hopeful improvement, until the trunk wobbles backward, leaning in the opposite direction with a kind of wooden defiance. Dad frowns, adjusts his grip, mutters something under his breath that sounds like every year, and tightens the screws again. His robe sleeve brushes against a branch, knocking loose a silver ornament that swings in slow, dramatic circles. It does not fall, but it makes its displeasure known with a hollow clink against another ornament. The tree remains unmoved. Children begin gathering at a distance, drawn to the scene by curiosity and the unspoken understanding that this is part of Christmas. They sit on the rug, legs folded, toys temporarily abandoned. Watching Dad fight the tree is almost as entertaining as the holiday parade on TV. Almost. Even the dog wanders over, tail wagging, sniffing the branches with the hopeful delusion that someone might drop a snack during the commotion. Dad's second attempt is more forceful. He braces the tree with both hands, tightening the screws with a dramatic twist of the wrist. The branch nearest him releases another cascade of needles that patter softly onto his lap. A strand of tinsel flutters downward like a tiny banner of surrender or mockery. It is hard to say which. The lights flicker again. Dad pauses. His jaw flexes. He looks at the cord snaking across the carpet, and then at the overloaded outlet where far too many plugs connect to far too few sockets. He wiggles one of the bulbs as if asserting dominance, and for a moment the entire string brightens, then dims again with a sighing buzz. Dad straightens his back. He cracks his knuckles. He adjusts his robe belt like a boxer tightening gloves before a final round. He dives back in. This time the entire tree shifts. The top sways dangerously close to a framed picture of the cousins. Dad jerks backward, narrowly preventing a disaster that would definitely have been talked about for decades. Mom inhales quietly through her nose, but still says nothing. Children lean forward, breath held. Dad grips the trunk with renewed conviction. He tightens the remaining screw slowly, deliberately, with the high-stakes intensity of a man trying to prevent his holiday from collapsing physically and symbolically. The final twist echoes through the quiet room like the closing of a small but victorious chapter. And then, silence. Dad stands up, brushing pine needles from his robe, stepping back to examine his work. The tree stands straighter now, perhaps not perfectly straight, but acceptably upright in the way all 1,952 Christmas trees eventually are, slightly flawed, slightly tired, but proud and glowing. The children exhale. Mom smiles softly behind her mug. The dog sneezes on a fallen branch. Dad nods, satisfied. His masterpiece, this wobbly symbol of perseverance, once again survives the morning. But he is not done. He begins the second phase of the ritual, the light inspection. He leans close, peering at each bulb with the same intensity a scientist might apply to an important experiment. He taps individual bulbs, adjusts connections, and murmurs small encouragements, as if coaxing a reluctant performer onto stage. The lights respond with a jittery blink, glowing in uneven pulses that somehow feel exactly right for a house built on tradition rather than perfection. One bulb refuses to cooperate. Dad unscrews it, examines it, blows on it for reasons unknown, and replaces it. The bulb flickers once, twice, then springs to life. A small cheer erupts from the children. Dad smiles, almost bashfully, and tucks the tools back into the drawer near the fireplace. The tree, now fully illuminated, bathes the room in a warm glow that feels like a promise kept. As Dad sinks back onto the sofa, the children scatter again back to their toys, their books, their tiny worlds of imagination. Mom hands him a fresh cup of coffee. He accepts it with grateful hands, the steam rising gently into the cozy air. The tree stands proud in the corner, shining through the soft haze of morning. It is imperfect, slightly uneven, a little tired, but beautiful, because in a mid-century Christmas, beauty never came from perfection. It came from effort, from trying, from the soft, wonderful truth that traditions, even the chaotic, awkward ones, hold families together in ways nothing else can. Dad versus the Christmas tree was not just a battle. It was a love story, a quiet one, wrapped in tinsel and pine needles. And like all the best holiday moments, it ended not with applause, but with peace. Once the tree had finally stopped wobbling and Dad settled back into the comfort of his sofa, the morning entered its next gentle chapter. The gifts were open, the stockings emptied, the air warm with the quiet hum of satisfaction. Children played on the carpet, their new treasures scattered around them like small islands in a sea of wrapping paper. And just as the energy of the living room began to settle into a quiet rhythm, a new scent drifted from the kitchen, the unmistakable aroma of breakfast starting to grow. In a 1,950 seconds home, the kitchen was a universe of its own, a place where warmth collected, not just from the oven or the stovetop, but from the steady hands that turned simple ingredients into comfort. Even from the doorway, the faint crackle of a skillet or the rustle of a mixing bowl promised something familiar and delightful. Christmas breakfast did not need to be elaborate. It simply needed to feel like home. The first sounds came softly. The clink of utensils, the gentle scrape of a spoon against a bowl, the metallic hiss of a pan warming on the stove. Mom usually led this part of the morning with a certain calm expertise, not rushed, not stressed, just moving with the quiet assurance of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. Occasionally she hummed a tune, not a carol, but something simple and soothing, the kind of melody that fit the softness of the day. Children slowly drifted toward the kitchen doorway, led by curiosity more than hunger. The living room, though magical, could not compete with the warm glow and comforting scents spilling from the kitchen. The contrast was striking. The cool pine smell of the tree behind them, and now the warm scent of batter sizzling on the stove ahead. The shift felt like stepping from one wonderful world into another. Breakfast in the 1,950 seconds had its own aesthetic, a combination of practicality and quiet charm. Pancakes were often the first thing cooked, not the perfectly round, evenly golden ones seen in modern advertisements, but pancakes with character slightly uneven at the edges, bubbles forming softly in the center, each flip revealing a pattern unique to that moment. When a pancake hit the plate, steam lifted in slow, delicate ribbons, carrying with it the sweetness of flour and butter. Nearby, a glass pitcher held orange juice, made from frozen concentrate, mixed earlier with a wooden spoon until the last icy clump melted into the bright, citrusy swirl. The juice was not fresh squeezed, but its flavor carried a kind of optimistic brightness, like bottled sunshine. Children often sneaked sips before being told to wait for everyone to sit down. If the skillet was large enough, a few slices of ham or a familiar canned meat browned quietly on one side, crackling softly as the edges curled. Toast popped up from the small chrome toaster with a slightly uneven tan, ready to be spread with butter that softened almost instantly. Sometimes cereal made an appearance. 2 colorful rings or crisp flakes poured into bowls, topped with milk that turned faintly pastel from the dye of the cereal pieces. The kitchen grew warm, almost too warm, but in the cozy way that made the windows fog at the corners. The oven door might open briefly, releasing a wave of heat that fogged Dad's glasses if he wandered too close. Someone might drop a spoon, sending a quick metallic tap across the linoleum. The floor, often patterned in bold mid-century colors, reflected the soft overhead light in a gentle glow. Eventually, Mom called everyone to the table in that tone, that carried both invitation and authority, firm enough to gather the room, soft enough to keep the magic intact. Children scrambled to their chairs, sliding on socks, bumping into each other with small bursts of laughter. Dad arrived last, still brushing pine needles from his robe, as if the remnants of his earlier battle refused to fully leave him. The table was a picture of mid-century comfort. A simple tablecloth, often checkered or floral, lay beneath mismatched plates collected over the years. Glasses clinked softly as they were set down. Silverware reflected the golden morning light. And in the center, steam rose from a stack of pancakes that looked like a small tower of warmth and sweetness. Everyone served themselves in their own way. A child poured syrup with dramatic enthusiasm, letting it flow across the pancakes in caramel-colored rivers. Someone reached for the butter, leaving a faint smear on the tablecloth that no one really minded. Dad reached for the ham. Mom slid a spatula under another pancake, adding it to the stack with practiced grace. The first bite was always slow and thoughtful, not because of etiquette, but because the food was genuinely comforting. Pancakes tasted like soft clouds sweetened by memory. The juice tasted bright and cold, a perfect counterbalance to the warmth of everything else. The toast crunched lightly, carrying just enough butter to melt gently on the tongue. Children talked with their mouths half full, not loudly, but with the kind of soft enthusiasm that only mornings like this could inspire. They discussed their new toys, or described which present surprised them most, or announced which gift they planned to play with first after breakfast. Their words blended with the small household sounds, the steady hum of the refrigerator, the gentle tick of the clock on the wall, the soft scrape of forks against plates. Dad often told small stories during Christmas breakfast, not dramatic stories, but nostalgic ones, about his own childhood, about the toy train he received when he was their age, about the Christmas morning when everything went wrong but still ended up perfect. Mom would listen with a smile, occasionally adding a detail or reminding him of something he forgot. The stories were simple, but they wrapped the room in a sense of history, making everyone feel connected to something larger than the moment itself. No one was in a hurry. The day stretched ahead like a long, quiet road. There would be time later for visitors, for phone calls from relatives, for playing in the snow if the weather allowed. But breakfast, this slow, warm gathering around the table, was the pause between the excitement of gifts and the energy of the rest of the day. It grounded everything, turning the morning into something that felt whole and balanced. As plates gradually emptied, conversation softened. Children leaned back in their chairs, full and content. Dad finished his second cup of coffee. Mom finally sat down with her own plate, taking the kind of slow, peaceful bites that come only after feeding everyone else. The warmth of the kitchen wrapped around them like a soft blanket. When breakfast ended, no one stood immediately. They lingered, looking around the table, at each other, at the gently cooling food. This lingering was its own ritual, a quiet thank you, unspoken but deeply felt. Eventually, someone rose to carry plates to the sink, starting the slow process of cleaning. A faucet turned on. Running water joined the soft soundscape. Children drifted back toward the living room, their footsteps light on the linoleum and muffled on the carpet. The dining table returned to stillness. And just like that, Christmas morning continued its gentle unfolding, with bellies warm, hearts light, and the soft glow of comfort stretching through every room. It was a simple breakfast, but in the 1950 secondo, simple did not mean small. Simple meant meaningful. Simple meant together. Simple meant exactly enough. Once the tree had finally stopped wobbling and Dad settled back into the comfort of his sofa, the morning entered its next gentle chapter. The gifts were open, the stockings emptied, the air warm with a quiet hum of satisfaction. Children played on the carpet, their new treasures scattered around them like small islands in a sea of wrapping paper. And just as the energy of the Cretu living room began to settle into a quiet rhythm, a new scent drifted from the kitchen, the unmistakable aroma of breakfast starting to grow. In a 1,950 seconds home, The kitchen was a universe of its own, a place where warmth collected, not just from the oven or the stovetop, but from the steady hands that turned simple ingredients into comfort. Even from the doorway, the faint crackle of a skillet or the rustle of a mixing bowl promised something familiar and delightful. Christmas breakfast did not need to be elaborate. It simply needed to feel like home. The first sounds came softly. The clink of utensils, the gentle scrape of a spoon against a bowl, the metallic hiss of a pan warming on the stove. Mom usually led this part of the morning with a certain calm expertise, not rushed, not stressed, just moving with the quiet assurance of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. Occasionally she hummed a tune, not a carol, but something simple and soothing, the kind of melody that fit the softness of the day. Children slowly drifted toward the kitchen doorway, led by curiosity more than hunger. The living room, though magical, could not compete with the warm glow and comforting scents spilling from the kitchen. The contrast was striking. The cool pine smell of the tree behind them, and now the warm scent of batter sizzling on the stove ahead. The shift felt like stepping from one wonderful world into another. Breakfast, in the 1,950 seconds, had its own aesthetic, a combination of practicality and quiet charm. Pancakes were often the first thing cooked, not the perfectly round, evenly golden ones seen in modern advertisements, but pancakes with character slightly uneven at the edges, bubbles forming softly in the center, each flip revealing a pattern unique to that moment. When a pancake hit the plate, steam lifted in slow, delicate ribbons, carrying with it the sweetness of flour and butter. Nearby, a glass pitcher held orange juice made from frozen concentrate, mixed earlier with a wooden spoon until the last icy clump melted into the bright, citrusy swirl. The juice was not fresh squeezed, but its flavor carried a kind of optimistic brightness, like bottled sunshine. Children often sneaked sips before being told to wait for everyone to sit down. If the skillet was large enough, a few slices of ham or a familiar canned meat browned quietly on one side, crackling softly as the edges curled. Toast popped up from the small chrome toaster with a slightly uneven tan, ready to be spread with butter that softened almost instantly. Sometimes cereal made an appearance. 2 colorful rings or crisp flakes poured into bowls, topped with milk that turned faintly pastel from the dye of the cereal pieces. The kitchen grew warm, almost too warm, but in the cozy way that made the windows fog at the corners. The oven door might open briefly, releasing a wave of heat that fogged Dad's glasses if he wandered too close. Someone might drop a spoon, sending a quick metallic tap across the linoleum. The floor, often patterned in bold mid-century colors, reflected the soft overhead light in a gentle glow. Eventually, Mom called everyone to the table, in that tone that carried both invitation and authority, firm enough to gather the room, soft enough to keep the magic intact. Children scrambled to their chairs, sliding on socks, bumping into each other with small bursts of laughter. Dad arrived last, still brushing pine needles from his robe, as if the remnants of his earlier battle refused to fully leave him. The table was a picture of mid-century comfort. A simple tablecloth, often checkered or floral, lay beneath mismatched plates collected over the years. Glasses clinked softly as they were set down. Silverware reflected the golden morning light, and in the center, steam rose from a stack of pancakes that looked like a small tower of warmth and sweetness. Everyone served themselves in their own way. A child poured syrup with dramatic enthusiasm, letting it flow across the pancakes in caramel-colored rivers. Someone reached for the butter, leaving a faint smear on the tablecloth that no one really minded. Dad reached for the ham. Mom slid a spatula under another pancake, adding it to the stack with practiced grace. The first bite was always slow and thoughtful, not because of etiquette, but because the food was genuinely comforting. Pancakes tasted like soft clouds sweetened by memory. The juice tasted bright and cold, a perfect counterbalance to the warmth of everything else. The toast crunched lightly, carrying just enough butter to melt gently on the tongue. Children talked with their mouths half full, not loudly, but with the kind of soft enthusiasm that only mornings like this could inspire. They discussed their new toys, or described which present surprised them most, or announced which gift they planned to play with first after breakfast. Their words blended with the small household sounds, the steady hum of the refrigerator, the gentle tick of the clock on the wall, the soft scrape of forks against plates. Dad often told small stories during Christmas breakfast, not dramatic stories, but nostalgic ones, about his own childhood, about the toy train he received when he was their age, about the Christmas morning when everything went wrong but still ended up perfect. Mom would listen with a smile, occasionally adding a detail or reminding him of something he forgot. The stories were simple, but they wrapped the room in a sense of history, making everyone feel connected to something larger than the moment itself. No one was in a hurry. The day stretched ahead like a long, quiet road. There would be time later for visitors, for phone calls from relatives, for playing in the snow if the weather allowed. But breakfast, this slow, warm gathering around the table, was the pause between the excitement of gifts and the energy of the rest of the day. It grounded everything, turning the morning into something that felt whole and balanced. As plates gradually emptied, conversation softened. Children leaned back in their chairs, full and content. Dad finished his second cup of coffee. Mom finally sat down with her own plate, taking the kind of slow, peaceful bites that come only after feeding everyone else. The warmth of the kitchen wrapped around them like a soft blanket. When breakfast ended, no one stood immediately. They lingered, looking around the table, at each other, at the gently cooling food. This lingering was its own ritual, a quiet thank you, unspoken but deeply felt. Eventually, someone rose to carry plates to the sink, starting the slow process of cleaning. A faucet turned on. Running water joined the soft soundscape. Children drifted back toward the living room, their footsteps light on the linoleum and muffled on the carpet. The dining table returned to stillness. And just like that, Christmas morning continued its gentle unfolding, with bellies warm, hearts light, and the soft glow of comfort stretching through every room. It was a simple breakfast, but in the 1950 secondo, simple did not mean small. Simple meant meaningful. Simple meant together. Simple meant exactly enough. After breakfast settled warmly in everyone's stomach and the kitchen slowly returned to its calm of domestic hum, the next act of the 1950 Christmas morning unfolded with a mix of ceremony and mild reluctance. The ritual of getting dressed for the family photo. It was an event that hovered in the background of every holiday, something no one discussed openly until it was time, like a quiet tradition that tiptoed into the day and claimed its place. You could feel it coming, even before Mom said anything. The shift in her tone, the way she glanced toward the closet hallway, the subtle smoothing of her dress. Small signs that meant very clearly, it is time. Children, still glowing with the excitement of new toys, tended to groan softly when the moment became official. Not loudly, because Christmas softened even complaints, but with a kind of small sigh that meant they were preparing themselves for wool, buttons, and stiff shoes. Mom would gather the outfits she had laid out days earlier, pressed neatly and placed on the bed the night before. Holiday clothes were not optional. They were part of the season, as essential as the tree or the stockings. The process always began with brushing hair. Children squirmed as Mom guided a comb through knots created by a night of restless anticipation. The comb moved with a mixture of patience and subtle urgency. A few strands refused to lay flat no matter how many times they were coaxed downward, and Mom would eventually decide they added character. Then came the sweaters. Heavy knits in reds, greens, or muted browns. Wool that scratched lightly against the skin but looked wonderful in photographs. Sweaters that added 10 degrees of warmth even though the house was already heating up from breakfast and morning activity. Shirts were buttoned, all the way to the top. Collars carefully adjusted. Dresses were smoothed. Ribbons tightened. Shoes polished the night before with small circles of cloth. Some children wore suspenders, tugging at them experimentally, as if they were not quite convinced of their purpose. Others wore tights that never felt aligned properly, always twisting slightly no matter how straight they were pulled. Everyone shuffled and grumbled as the finishing touches were added: straightened hems, collars tucked correctly, sweaters pulled down to eliminate odd bulges. Dad had his own version of this ritual, which involved disappearing into the bedroom and re-emerging in slacks and a pressed shirt, looking both festive and slightly uncomfortable. His shoes had a shine that suggested they only left the closet for holidays and special occasions. He adjusted his belt, checked his watch, cleared his throat once, and then nodded his way of saying he was fully prepared, even if only partially enthusiastic. The living room, still scattered with bits of wrapping paper and the happy clutter of new gifts, transformed into a temporary photo studio. Mom retrieved the family camera, a solid, boxy device with a distinct click and a small flashbulb perched like a watchful eye. It required care, a steady hand, and a brief moment of stillness after pressing the shutter. And no one, absolutely no one, could blink. The family assembled near the tree, not too close, to avoid the risk of ornaments shaking loose, but close enough that the glow of the lights framed their faces. Dad guided everyone into position with the seriousness of a general arranging his troops. One child stood slightly in front. Another sat cross-legged on the floor. Mom adjusted a collar here, smoothed a wrinkle there, turned someone's shoulders to the right by a precise fraction of an inch. Then came the hardest part, staying still. Stillness did not come naturally to children who had just opened presents and consumed syrup-laden pancakes, but for the sake of the annual Christmas photograph, they tried. They lifted their chins. They attempted soft smiles, some genuine, some very determined. The dog wandered into the frame, sniffed a decorative pillow, and settled in as if it, too, understood the significance of the moment. Mom lifted the camera, closing one eye as she looked through the small viewfinder. "Everyone ready?" she asked, even though the answer was always both yes and no. Dad placed a steadying hand on the youngest child's shoulder to prevent a sudden wiggle. A sibling quietly elbowed another for taking up too much space. Someone in the back sniffled softly. The tree lights blinked in their slow, uneven pattern. "Hold still," Mom instructed, and for a moment, time froze. A click, a pop of light. The flash brightened the room for a fraction of a second, capturing not just faces and clothes, but the entire essence of the morning. Excitement hidden beneath neatly combed hair, comfort disguised under scratchy wool, the lingering glow of new memories forming. Everyone blinked afterward, briefly stunned by the brightness. But of course, one photo was never enough. Another angle was needed. Another grouping. Another attempt where no one blinked, no one frowned, and no ornament in the background looked crooked. Dad took turns behind the camera as well, insisting that Mom be in at least one of the pictures, even if she protested that her hair was not perfect anymore, or the kitchen timer might go off soon. He reassured her with a smile, only she truly understood, and she joined the children in front of the tree, smoothing her dress automatically as she sat down. The flash popped again, bathing the room in a brief burst of artificial daylight. Between shots, children shifted impatiently, adjusting sweaters, scratching at wool collars, tapping their shoes on the floor in small patterns. But they behaved, because Christmas had a way of softening even their restlessness. Eventually, after several attempts, Mom declared that they had captured at least one good one, and everyone sighed with relief. Soft, subtle sighs, but sincere. The camera was placed safely back in its case. The flashbulb cooled on a side table. The stiff shoes were loosened. Sweaters itched a little less when arms were raised. Children began retreating toward their toys again, shedding the temporary stiffness of their posing like actors stepping off stage. Dad loosened his collar. Mom smoothed down her hair one last time, then smiled to herself as she headed back toward the kitchen. But despite the mild discomfort and the forced stillness, there was always something magical about the family photo. Years later, when the album came out of the cupboard and the plastic pages lifted with a soft crackle, those pictures became treasures. The itchy sweaters no longer mattered. The stiff shoes were forgotten. What remained was the glow of the tree shining in the corner, the soft smiles, the beginning of favorite memories. You could see the warmth in every detail, the gleam of tinsel behind Dad's shoulder, the soft fuzz of the dog's fur near the tree skirt, the glimmer of pride in Mom's eyes even when she thought she looked tired. The photos were imperfect, always, and that was exactly why they were beautiful. So even though the annual family portrait required effort, patience, and a tolerance for wool, it held a quiet purpose. It captured the gentle stillness amid the joyful chaos, the moment everyone came together and held their breath. The camera froze, not just a pose, but a feeling, one that lingered long after the flash faded. And when the photo was done, the sweaters were tolerated, the shoes were kicked off, and the morning rolled forward once more, carrying its soft glow into the rest of the day. Once the photographs were finally taken and everyone slipped back into the comfort of soft socks and relaxed shoulders, Christmas morning eased into one of its most unpredictable yet heartwarming phases. The slow arrival of visitors, the shuffle of neighbors at the door, the scattered sounds of carolers drifting in from the street. It was a moment when the quiet intimacy of the early morning began opening itself to the wider world politely, gently, without urgency. A transformation from private celebration to shared community. The living room, still carrying the warm glow of the tree lights and the soft clutter of new toys, shifted again as the day stretched forward. Children resumed playing with freshly unboxed treasures, their attention hopping from one gift to the next with the kind of joyful disarray that felt entirely fitting for the day. Dad sank deeper into his favorite chair, a newspaper folded but untouched on the side table beside him, the radio humming faintly with festive tunes played by orchestras and smooth-voiced singers of the era. Mom tidied small corners in slow, purposeful movements, not cleaning, exactly, but readying the space for whomever might arrive. Because in the 1,950 seconds, Christmas was a day of open doors. The first knock usually came softly, sometimes so gentle that only the dog noticed. Its ears perked up, tail wagging in slow sweeps as it trotted to the front door. Then came another knock, more certain this time. Mom or Dad answered with a warm Merry Christmas. spoken with the kind of genuine warmth that belonged to a time when neighbors were more like extended family. Standing on the porch, dusted with a bit of winter cold, were neighbors carrying a tin of cookies or a small wrapped loaf of homemade bread. They stepped inside, brushing off the chill, their cheeks rosy from the crisp outdoor air. The living room filled quickly with additional voices, soft greetings, light laughter, the familiar exchange of holiday pleasantries that made everyone feel both welcome and connected. The neighbors admired the tree first. That was always the beginning. They commented on the shimmer of the tinsel, the charming glow of the bulbs, the arrangement of ornaments. Mom accepted these compliments shyly, with a smile that crinkled at the corners, while Dad nodded modestly, subtly pleased that his battle with the wobbling tree had not been in vain. Children proudly showed off their new toys, holding them up with eager hands, recounting the excitement of the morning with a mix of detail and breathless enthusiasm. The visit never felt rushed. Neighbors sat for a moment, warming their hands around a cup of coffee or a small glass of holiday punch. They talked about their own morning, who overslept, who woke too early, which gift surprised them most. Conversations drifted easily between stories of the past and hopes for the coming year. And when they left, the door closed with a soft thump that seemed to carry their warmth with it, lingering in the air like a pleasant echo. Next came the relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, arriving in small waves throughout the late morning and early afternoon. They never arrived at the same time, and no one expected them to. Some brought pies or casseroles wrapped in cloth, still warm from the oven. Others brought small gifts, tied with fabric ribbons, or simple cards containing handwritten notes. The hallway filled with coats, wool coats, plaid coats, long coats, with heavy buttons, draped over chairs, or hung wherever space allowed. The house grew louder, but not chaotic. It was the comforting kind of noise, overlapping conversations, quiet exclamations of delight, the soft screech of a chair being pulled closer to the table, the melodic clatter of extra dishes being brought out. Someone always commented on how much the children had grown. Someone always laughed at a story that had been told countless times before, but still felt funny. Someone always complimented the smell of the kitchen, where leftover breakfast lingered and the first hints of the afternoon meal began to brew. Amid all this, the sound of carolers often drifted in from the street. In the 1,950 seconds, caroling was a living tradition, carried on by groups of neighbors, school children, and church choirs. You could hear them before you saw them, the soft murmur of harmonized voices growing clearer as they came nearer. Children rushed to the window, pressing their palms to the cool glass as they watched the group approach, bundled in scarves and mittens. When the door opened, the cold air swept in gently, carrying the scent of winter. The carolers arranged themselves with practiced ease and began to sing, not loudly, but with a warmth that seemed to melt into the house. Their voices blended in a simple, unpolished harmony that felt sincere, untouched by performance or perfection. The songs were familiar, melodies everyone knew by heart, even if they did not sing along. The tree lights flickered softly as the notes filled the doorway. After the final verse, the family offered a small thank you, sometimes cookies, sometimes coins, sometimes simply smiles and gratitude. The carolers moved on to the next house, their footsteps crunching lightly in the snow, their voices fading like gentle echoes. Visitors came and went throughout the day. Some stayed for longer conversations, settling onto the sofa with plates of cookies and stories of years past. Others stayed just long enough to hug the children and exchange holiday wishes before heading off to their next home. The house became a kind of crossroads, a place where people gathered briefly, shared warmth, and then drifted back into their own celebrations. Even the mailman might stop by, delivering a late card or simply offering a cheerful greeting on his route. It was not unusual. In mid-century neighborhoods, everyone knew everyone, and holidays blurred the lines between household and community in ways that felt comforting and natural. Inside, the living room absorbed all this activity with a quiet resilience. Toys moved from one corner to another as children showed them off to visitors. Dad's chair became a general meeting point, occupied sometimes by an uncle telling a story with grand hand gestures, sometimes by a cousin examining a new gift, sometimes by Dad himself, in rare moments when the seat remained vacant. The tree continued to glow with its slow, steady rhythm, acting as the silent observer of everything. Conversations, laughter, small reunions, the gentle chaos of people weaving around each other. As the morning stretched into afternoon, the house reached a point where its walls seemed to hold more warmth than ever. The scent of pine grew richer as the tree warmed slightly under the lights. The kitchen began producing new aromas, spices, simmering broth, freshly baked rolls drifting into the living room and blending with the faint perfume of visiting relatives. The best part of this phase was not the noise itself, but the texture of it, layered, warm, ever-shifting. A baby crying briefly in the hallway. Someone laughing unexpectedly. A child shouting with excitement over a toy that does this. Look what it can do. A quiet murmur from two older relatives catching up on family news. The dog barking at something it found extremely interesting, but not necessarily relevant. The house felt alive in every corner. And yet, despite the gentle chaos, there was always a sense of order underneath it all, the kind of natural flow that mid-century families understood instinctively. Visitors came, stayed, left. The door opened and closed. Voices rose and fell. And through it all, the heart of Christmas remained steady, anchored by the tree, the warmth, and the sense of togetherness that filled every room. Eventually, the visitors slowed. The last neighbor waved goodbye from the porch. The final relative stepped into the cold, their breath forming little clouds in the fading afternoon light. The door shut with a soft, final click that wrapped the house again in a quieter kind of warmth. The peaceful warmth that comes after shared moments settled gently into memory. And just like that, the day exhaled. The house grew calm once more. The tree lights blinked softly in the dimming room. Children returned to their toys. Dad glanced at the clock. Mom smoothed the tablecloth and looked around with a faint, satisfied smile. The quiet returned, not the early morning quiet full of anticipation, but the afternoon quiet full of contentment. The kind of quiet that only comes after a house has been filled with life. As the afternoon settled in and the cheerful hum of visiting neighbors faded into a gentle quiet, the house entered one of the most tender and comically unpredictable chapters of a 1,950 seconds Christmas. The preparation of the holiday dinner, the kitchen, which had been a warm sanctuary during breakfast, now transformed into a bustling stage filled with clattering dishes, simmering pots, and the unmistakable rhythm of mid-century cooking. The earlier stillness gave way to a new kind of energy, not frantic, not stressed, but purposeful, like a slow-moving orchestra tuning itself for the evening's main performance. Mom took her place at the center of it all, with an apron tied neatly around her waist, smoothing its front with the calm confidence of someone who had navigated many holiday meals before. The kitchen was not large, but it held a surprising amount of warmth, both literal and emotional. Steam clouded the windows, turning the view outside into a soft watercolor. The oven door opened and closed with soft thumps, releasing bursts of heat that escaped like sighs into the cooler air of the hallway. The clatter of utensils, the whirl of the hand mixer, the hum of the refrigerator, all blended into a soundtrack that felt deeply familiar. Children drifted in and out, curious but cautious. They knew the kitchen was both magical and slightly intimidating during holiday cooking. They watched as Mom basted the turkey with slow, steady strokes, the golden skin glistening beneath the warm light of the oven. The turkey was the centerpiece, of course, though in most 1,950 seconds homes, it leaned slightly toward unpredictable. Sometimes it cooked faster than expected. Sometimes the thermometer insisted on being difficult. Sometimes the bird browned beautifully. And sometimes it developed a stubborn patch of pale skin that refused to tan, no matter how many times it was rotated. But this unpredictability was simply part of the mid-century charm. Side dishes filled every available surface. There were rolls rising in a bowl beneath a towel, their doughy surfaces soft and fragrant. Beside them sat canned cranberry sauce, still in the perfect ridged shape of the can from which it had been released, a culinary icon of the era, both humorous and beloved. A green bean casserole, topped with crispy onions, sat steaming gently on the counter, its aroma rich with nostalgia even in the moment of its creation. A bowl of olives stood nearby, because in the 1,950 seconds, olives were a holiday staple. Even if half the guests preferred to simply admire them rather than eat them. And then there were the more mysterious dishes, the ones whose recipes had been passed down with affection rather than precision. A yellow mold, quivering in bright, jewel-like colors, held fruit suspended in its translucent body like small artifacts caught in amber. Sometimes the jello contained pineapple, sometimes grapes, sometimes, oddly, shredded carrots. It made perfect sense to the past and mild confusion to the present, but on Christmas no one questioned its place on the table. Nearby sat a bowl of creamed onions, or perhaps pickled beets, dishes whose presence was less about flavor and more about tradition, the kind of tradition that clung lovingly to families no matter how tastes evolved. Dad wandered into the kitchen occasionally, offering to check on things in a tone that suggested he was helping, even if everyone quietly understood that his assistance was largely symbolic. He lifted lids, nodded appreciatively at simmering pots, and sampled gravy with exaggerated thoughtfulness. Mom smiled indulgently, knowing that this was simply part of the dance of Christmas. Children giggled when Dad made a face, after tasting something unexpectedly tart or unusually spiced, and Mom gently shooed him away with a playful wave of the wooden spoon whenever he lingered too close to the main course. Throughout the house, the air thickened with delicious scents: roasting turkey, sweet rolls, savory casseroles, spices floating upward like invisible ornaments decorating the space. The warmth from the oven spread outward, creating cozy pockets of heat in the hallway and dining room. Even the tree seemed to stand a little straighter, its lights reflecting softly in the faint haze rising from the kitchen doorway. Slowly, the dining table transformed. A tablecloth, often adorned with embroidered snowflakes or tiny holly leaves, was smoothed across its surface. Plates were arranged with a gentle clink, silverware placed carefully beside them, each piece reflecting the glow of the overhead light. Glasses, slightly mismatched but loved all the same, formed a small army waiting for water, punch, or perhaps a festive beverage for the adults. A bowl of butter, shaped into curls with a small decorative tool, sat at the center. Nearby, Mom placed the jello mold with a proud but slightly cautious expression, as if hoping it would hold its structure until dessert. Children, sensing the final moments approaching, took their places reluctantly, but respectfully. They knew the rule: no nibbling, no touching, and absolutely no sneaking a roll until everyone sat down together. Dad called for everyone to gather, and the house shifted into a soft hush like a deep inhalation. Guests who had stopped by earlier and stayed for dinner took their seats, their cheeks warm from the kitchen heat and the cushion of holiday conversation. And then, finally, with a triumphant movement and a smile that held both relief and pride, Mom carried the turkey to the table. The room filled with admiration, genuine, enthusiastic admiration for the centerpiece of the feast. Dad carved with the careful attention of someone performing a small but important ceremony. The slices fell onto the platter in tender, steaming layers. Rolls were passed around. Cranberry sauce glistened under the dining room light. The green bean casserole offered its comforting aroma. Plates filled quickly, generously, warmly. The first moments of eating were always quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes when the food is good, the company is comforting, and the day is already perfect. Then the conversation began again, soft and winding, full of warmth. Children talked about their toys. Adults reminisced about past holidays. Someone inevitably told a small, funny story that made others laugh softly into their napkins. The soft clinking of cutlery against plates created a rhythm that felt familiar, something woven into the fabric of countless Christmases before. Not everything on the table was perfect. Sometimes the rolls were a little too brown. Sometimes the turkey was a bit dry. Sometimes the Jell-O mold leaned slightly on one side. But perfection was not the goal. Connection was. Every dish carried effort and intention, and that intention infused the meal with a kind of magic no recipe could replicate. Even the slightly burned edges of a casserole felt like part of the holiday tapestry. After the meal, the table lingered in a satisfying state of gentle disorder. Half-empty bowls, plates flecked with gravy, crumbs scattered like confetti. The conversation slowed. Chairs creaked softly as people leaned back in. Them. Dadzig. Contentedly. Mom allowed herself a rare moment of stillness in her chair. Children slumped sleepily, full of both food and happiness. Eventually, the slow process of cleanup began, not rushed, not unpleasant, just a quiet shifting from fullness to contentment. Leftovers found new homes in containers. The last bits of cranberry sauce were scraped into a bowl. Someone washed while someone else dried. The kitchen, steadily returning to order, glowed with a sense of accomplishment. And when it was finally done, the house felt different again. Not buzzing, not bustling, but deeply peaceful. The kind of peace that settles gently after a day filled with conversation, warmth, and tradition. The tree still glowed in the corner. The children lay scattered around the living room, drifting between play and drowsiness. The afternoon light dimmed softly, turning the windows into golden mirrors. It was in this quiet, after the feast, that the true heart of a 1,950 seconds Christmas dinner revealed itself, not in the complexity of the dishes, nor in the perfection of the table, but in the gentle human moments between them. The smiles, the shared stories, the clatter, the gratitude woven subtly into every bite. And as the dining room settled once more into silence, the warmth of the day lingered long after the plates were cleared, a warmth that had nothing to do with the oven and everything to do with being together. As the afternoon slowly dissolved into that soft, golden haze that only winter afternoons seemed to hold, the house began to move into yet another gentle chapter of the Christmas story. The feast had ended, the table had been cleared, and the warmth of conversation still lingered like a faint perfume in the corners of the dining room. Children were stretched comfortably across the living room rug, bellies full, energy softened. Their earlier excitement now mellowed into something warm and dreamy. Dad rested in his favorite chair with the subtle posture of someone deeply content, his hands folded loosely, his eyes drifting toward the tree as if its glow was guiding him through a pleasant memory. Mom moved quietly through the house, not cleaning, not organizing, just existing in that peaceful way she did when the day's biggest tasks were behind her and the evening's gentler rituals had begun. The light outside dimmed, turning the windows into mirrors that reflected the soft glow of the tree back into the room. The world beyond the glass seemed distant now, almost paused, as if the snow-covered streets and quiet houses agreed to slow their pace for the remainder of the holiday. Inside, the house felt cocooned, safe, wrapped in warmth and familiarity. The radio played softly, a crooner's voice drifting through the living room in a slow, honey-like melody that added a layer of calm to the quiet scene. It was during this fading light that the games began. Board games were brought out from the hall closet, their cardboard boxes worn from years of use, the corners slightly frayed. Checkers, cards, simple family games, nothing elaborate, nothing complicated, just the kind of classic pastimes that encouraged togetherness. A card deck with slightly softened edges, a checkerboard whose pieces had been lost and replaced more times than anyone could remember, a puzzle missing one piece that no one had the heart to discard. These were the artifacts of mid-century family life, touched by countless hands, infused with countless stories. Dad usually initiated the first game with a slow, inviting gesture, his voice warm as he called the children over. They gathered around him, slipping into seats or settling cross-legged on the floor, the soft fibers of the rug pressing comfortingly against their legs. The game began gently, with laughter that rose like tiny sparks whenever someone made an unexpected move. The children's voices were soft, their giggles airy, their movements still a little sleepy from the feast. Dad played with the seriousness of someone who valued the ritual, but the kindness of someone who never forgot it was supposed to be fun. He might pretend to be bewildered by a clever move or exaggeratedly triumphant when he captured a checker, and the children would burst into delighted laughter every time. Nearby, Mom joined in occasionally, offering small comments of encouragement or gentle teasing remarks. Sometimes she sat at the table with visiting relatives, working on a quiet puzzle or reading a holiday card aloud. The living room felt like a constellation of small, glowing moments, each one soft and warm, overlapping just enough to create a sense of wholeness. And then, inevitably, came the stories. Stories were a kind of currency. On Christmas night in the 1950 seconds, gently traded, passed around, polished by repetition, given value not by their novelty but by the comfort they brought. An uncle might recall a holiday from his own childhood, describing a toy he treasured or a cousin who played a harmless prank. Someone might mention a winter storm from years ago that trapped the family indoors for days. Dad might begin describing the year when a string of lights short-circuited and left the entire house in darkness until they found the one mischievous bulb responsible. These stories flowed naturally, without prompting, like old friends dropping by. The adults shared them with slow, pleasant voices, letting each detail land softly, savoring the small smiles their memories brought to the room. Children listened with half-lidded eyes, sometimes lying on their stomachs, sometimes leaning against a parent's leg, absorbing every word, even when their attention drifted in and out with drowsy warmth. Somewhere between the stories and the games, Mom brought out dessert, not a grand finale, but a gentle offering to end the evening's savory richness. A plate of cookies, shaped like bells and stars, frosted in pastel colors. A small fruit cake that sat proudly in the center of the table, its dense texture filled with candies and nuts that divided opinions, but remained an essential tradition nonetheless. Slices were cut, plates were passed around, and the room once again filled with that soft, irresistible aroma of holiday sweetness. Dad nibbled on a cookie while telling a story about his childhood dog. A child examined the fruitcake with curiosity before deciding which part held the most cherries. The dog lay curled beneath the table, hopeful eyes glancing upward with every movement of food. As the evening deepened, the lights in the living room shifted to a softer setting. Lamps were dimmed. The tree lights blinked in their slow, mesmerizing rhythm, casting tiny pools of color across the walls and ceiling. Shadows danced gently, merging with the flicker of the bulbs to create a dreamlike ambiance. The radio switched to more serene melodies, sometimes fading into the background so quietly it became part of the air itself. Children began to tire, though in the stubborn way children do, resisting sleep not out of defiance, but out of a desire to make the magic last just a little longer. They lay on the floor, heads resting on new toys or soft pillows brought from the bedroom. Their voices grew quieter, their movements slower. They reached for one more cookie, one more round of the game, one more story, until their own bodies gently insisted on stillness. Adults exchanged soft glances, the kind that carried both tenderness and amusement. They understood the quiet arc of the evening, how the day's excitement had blossomed into late afternoon warmth, and now into the soft descent of Christmas night. They spoke in hushed tones, careful not to disturb the children drifting toward sleep. Sometimes an older relative would settle into the armchair near the tree and begin humming an old tune, not loudly, but with a familiarity that wrapped itself around the room. The melody floated gently through the fading glow, touching each corner of the living room, drawing the day toward its peaceful close. Outside, the world remained peaceful. The street was quiet, the snow lying undisturbed in smooth, pale blankets. A passing car might leave a soft trail of light behind it, but even that felt subdued, respectful of the stillness settling over the neighborhood. The air outside seemed to slow, as if the world was holding its breath in harmony with the families inside their homes. Eventually, Mom rose and gently encouraged the children toward bedtime. There were no protests, just slow movements, sleepy steps, soft smiles. The children hugged relatives goodnight, their small arms wrapping around wool coats and warm scarves. They carried their favorite toy of the day with them, dangling from tired hands. They climbed the stairs with the heavy-limbed quiet of holiday exhaustion, each step creaking beneath their weight in a familiar rhythm. Upstairs, pajamas replaced sweaters, and small faces were washed with warm cloths. The soft glow from the hallway lights spilled into their rooms, illuminating the flutter of tinsel still clinging to their hair or the faint crumbs from cookies enjoyed just minutes before. They slid into bed and pulled blankets up to their chins, the warmth enveloping them instantly. Somewhere outside, wind brushed lightly against the window, a gentle whispering sound that folded into the quiet of the house. Back downstairs, the adults lingered in the living room for a while longer. Dad finished the last page of the newspaper. Mom sipped a cooling cup of peppermint tea. The relatives closest to the hearth spoke in murmured tones, their voices blending with the soft rustle of the tree. The room felt timeless, as if the evening had stretched itself out to savor the feeling of being whole. Eventually, the adults began to depart, offering lingering goodbyes at the door, their laughter low and warm, their footsteps fading into the night. The house grew still, again, not empty, but resting. The tree lights blinked tenderly in the semi-darkness, reflecting off ornaments that had witnessed the entire day unfold. Dad unplugged the lights, eventually, watching the glow fade with a sense of gentle satisfaction. Mom gathered the last of the dishes, her movements slow and peaceful, and as they climbed the stairs, turning off the final light of the night, the house settled into a deep, restful quiet. The kind of quiet that comes only after a day lived fully, shared honestly, and held together by moments of simplicity and warmth. It was in this quiet that Christmas lived most deeply, not in the presents, or the feast, or the photographs, but in the soft, lingering peace that wrapped itself around the house like a blanket, a peace that would be remembered long after the tree was gone. As the house settled deeper into evening, long after the games gave way to comfortable silence, and the soft dessert sweetness lingered faintly in the air, Christmas Day drifted into its gentlest, most enchanted hours. The kind of hours where time seemed to stretch itself long and tender, as if reluctant to let the day slip away too quickly. Outside, the winter sky had deepened into a velvety blue. The last traces of sunlight faded behind the rooftops, leaving only the glow of porch lights and the faint shimmer of snow reflecting the quiet hum of the neighborhood. Inside, the air had cooled slightly, but the warmth of the day remained suspended in every corner, in every softly glowing bulb on the tree, in every hushed voice drifting through the living room. Dinner had been cleared, dishes washed or soaking quietly in warm suds, and leftovers tucked into containers, with the anticipation that they would reappear in new and creative forms over the next few days. Turkey sandwiches, warmed rolls, bits of casserole reheated for simple lunches, slices of pie rediscovered in late-night snacking moments. The kitchen felt like it had exhaled after a long shift, returning slowly to rest. The lingering aroma of spices, gravy, and warm rolls remained, not heavy, but comforting, like a quiet reminder of the shared meal that had anchored the day. The living room became the heart of the house again. The lights were dimmed low, save for the Christmas tree, which glowed softly in the corner like a patient storyteller waiting for its turn. The tinsel shimmered faintly as the bulbs blinked their slow, dreamy rhythm. Ornaments reflected tiny pieces of the room back into themselves, creating miniature worlds within their rounded glass surfaces. Dad reclined in his chair, legs stretched out slightly, the newspaper folded on his lap, unread but comforting to hold. Mom curled up on the sofa with a soft blanket draped over her legs, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. Every movement in the room became unhurried, every breath long and peaceful. The earlier excitement had melted into something even more beautiful, a sense of deep togetherness. This was when the stories returned, not the playful tales of earlier, but the slower, more reflective ones that came out only when the night grew quiet enough to hold them softly. Dad might begin with the memory of a long-ago Christmas, one from his own childhood, tucked somewhere deep in the heart of winter's past. He spoke with a gentler tone now, his voice lower, drifting like the last few embers of a fire. The children, sleepy but curious, gathered near him, with their new toys resting beside them, their eyes half-lidded yet bright. He told them about the heavy snowfalls of his youth, when roads disappeared under white hills and children built forts taller than themselves. He told them about the wooden toy soldiers his father carved for him, painted with thin brushes by firelight. He spoke of sledding down hills that felt almost endless, and warming his hands by the old stove after returning home with frozen cheeks. Mom added stories of her own memories of singing with her sisters near the piano, or helping her mother peel oranges for holiday treats, or the year her family received a radio and gathered around it, marveling at the world suddenly reaching them through a glowing dial. The children listened in that dreamy, half-awake way only children can, absorbing the spirit of the stories, even when their minds drifted. They did not remember every detail later, but they remembered the warmth, the cadence, the feeling of sitting wrapped in family history. The stories became part of them, woven into their understanding of the holiday like invisible threads stitched into the heart. Sometimes Dad or an uncle would take the opportunity to tell a mild winter legend, nothing frightening, just the kind of gentle folklore people enjoyed sharing on cold nights. Tales about how the snow whispered if you listened closely, or how the northern lights were said to be the brushstrokes of ancient winter artists painting the sky. Someone might talk softly about old traditions brought from distant relatives or countries, customs passed through generations like small lanterns in the dark. Outside, occasional gusts of wind brushed against the windows, creating a soft, soothing hum. Sometimes the branches of nearby trees tapped lightly against the glass in a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. The children shifted closer to their parents, partly from sleepiness, partly because the quiet night outside felt even more peaceful when they were held. Eventually, leftovers from the feast reappeared in miniature form as late-night snacks. Mom brought out a plate of sliced turkey and cold rolls, or perhaps a small dish of cranberry sauce and a few extra cookies that had not been touched earlier. Dad cut tiny slices from the fruitcake, making a show of inspecting each one as though searching for the perfect bite. The children nibbled at whatever seemed easiest, their stomachs still full, but their curiosity piqued by the novelty of second dessert. The living room became a tapestry of soft sounds, the gentle clink of a fork against a plate, the rustle of a blanket being adjusted, the whispered conversations between adults, the slow breaths of children drifting closer and closer to sleep. The radio continued playing in the background, sometimes fading into static for just a moment before clearing again, as if even it were settling into the calm of the night. As the evening deepened, the lights from the tree became the primary illumination in the room. Their glow softened the edges of furniture, made shadows dance gently across the walls, and cast a faint golden outline around each person. The tree looked different at night, more mysterious, somehow more alive, like it carried memories in its branches and radiated them slowly into the space around it. One of the children might curl up on the sofa, blanket pulled up to their chin, eyelids fluttering as sleep began to wrap around them. Another might fall asleep on the rug, surrounded by toys, their hands still loosely holding a new doll or a shiny truck. Dad gently lifted a drowsy child once or twice, carrying them to bed with careful steps, trying not to wake them. The house responded with its own quiet creaks, the nighttime settling sounds of old wooden beams, like soft sighs of contentment. Mom folded blankets. Dad unplugged the radio. The last few guests rose from their seats, hugging Mom and Dad goodnight, their coats rustling softly as they stepped into the cool night air. The door closed gently behind them, muffling the sound of distant footsteps on the snow. The house exhaled. Mom and Dad stood in the living room a moment longer, looking at the tree as if savoring the entire day in one long, grateful glance. Not speaking, because the silence itself felt sacred. The lights blinked softly, the last ornaments, shimmering faintly, before the room grew still. Mom switched off the final lamp. Dad unplugged the tree lights with a soft click. The ornaments, now catching only the faintest glow of moonlight, seemed to relax into shadows. The living room became a quiet cradle of memories, holding the day gently in its calm embrace. Upstairs, the children slept soundly, faces peaceful, hands still warm from earlier excitement. Their new toys lay scattered nearby, like tiny guardians of their dreams. The house grew quiet, not empty, but full, in a different way, full of gratitude, warmth, connection, and the lingering glow of a day lived slowly and well. In that stillness, the essence of a 1,950 seconds Christmas night took shape, not grand, not loud, not extravagant, but deeply peaceful. A night where stories settled into hearts, where laughter softened into memory, where the glow of togetherness outshone even the brightest lights on the tree. A night that stayed with you long after the wrapping paper was gone. As the final guests stepped out into the quiet night and the door closed behind them with a soft, padded thump, the house slipped into a deep, peaceful stillness. The kind of stillness that can only fall after a long day filled with warmth, conversation, and the slow unraveling of traditions. Outside, the evening had settled into a soft winter hush. Snow clung to rooftops and branches, turning each outline into a gentle silhouette against the pale glow of street lamps. Inside, the last notes of distant holiday music faded into silence, replaced by the quiet hum of the house resting. Mom stood in the living room for a moment, simply breathing in the calm. She looked around at the scattered remnants of the day, little piles of wrapping paper folded neatly by the fireplace, toys resting in cozy clusters on the rug, half-empty glasses that caught the faint shimmer of the tree lights. Each object felt like a small snapshot of the day's joy, scattered across the room like reminders of everything that had unfolded slowly and beautifully. The Christmas tree, though unplugged now, still held a kind of glow of its own. The ornaments reflected any sliver of light they could find, recalling the way they had shimmered earlier in the morning. Even the tinsel, now resting quietly on branches, carried memories of children's laughter and the soft rustling sounds that had filled the room just hours ago. The living room felt like it was wrapped in a blanket of contentment, and Mom lingered in that space, savoring it. Dad joined her after a moment, stepping softly on the rug so as not to disturb the children sleeping upstairs. He let out a quiet sigh, not of exhaustion, but of peaceful satisfaction, the kind of sound that happens when the day has been full in the best way possible. He looked at the wrapping paper pile, at the gifts resting by the sofa, at the faint reflection of the tree in the darkened window, and he smiled in that small, knowing way that only comes after years of experiencing the same holiday rhythm. They began the final cleanup together, moving through the room with slow, quiet steps. They gathered stray pieces of ribbon, folded blankets left on the sofa, and placed half-played board games neatly on the low shelf where they would sit until the next family evening. They stacked plates in the kitchen with gentle clinks, placed utensils in the sink, and wiped down the counters with warm cloths. This was not hurried work. It was calm, simple, almost meditative. A way of closing the day with intention. A way of letting the house settle with them. The kitchen, though tidier now, still carried the soft aroma of spices and warmth. Dad paused at the stove, running a hand lightly along the top as if acknowledging its long day's work. Mom rinsed the last of the mugs, setting them on the drying rack beside the sink where they caught the glow of the small window light, like tiny lanterns. When she turned off the tap, the house grew silent again, a deeper silence now, the kind that wrapped itself around the walls like a warm embrace. Before heading upstairs, Dad peeked into the living room one last time. He switched on the tree lights for a brief moment, just to see them glow. The room transformed instantly. The ornaments lit up like tiny planets, the tinsel shimmered like frozen starlight, and the shadows danced softly across the ceiling. It was a final moment of magic, a private encore just for the two of them. Then he unplugged the lights gently, allowing the glow to fade slowly, like the end of a cherished memory, tucking itself away. Upstairs, the house was quiet, except for the soft breaths of sleeping children. Mom checked on them, one by one, smoothing blankets and brushing stray strands of hair from small foreheads. Their rooms were dim but cozy, illuminated faintly by night lights placed beside their beds. Toys from earlier playtimes lay scattered around, each one a silent witness to the excitement that had unfolded that morning. The children slept deeply, still wrapped in the warmth of the day. Dad stood at the threshold of each room, watching with a softness he did not often show during the bustling daytime hours. He whispered a simple good night that seemed to settle gently into the air, barely audible but full of affection. The kind of whisper only a parent would ever know how to give, quiet, steady, connected. As they stepped into the hallway again, Mom and Dad walked slowly toward their own room, moving in the familiar, shared rhythm of two people who had weathered countless holidays together. The floors creaked beneath their steps, the comforting kind of creak that comes from an old house at rest, a house that has embraced an entire family through every celebration and ordinary day. The warmth from the downstairs oven no longer reached the upper floor, and a faint chill settled in the hallway, reminding them that winter still waited just beyond the windows. But the chill did not bother them. It felt natural after such a warm, full day. Once in their room, they changed into soft pajamas, folded their clothes neatly, and settled into bed. The quiet stretched comfortably between them. They did not need to speak. The day had spoken enough through shared moments, through the rustle of wrapping paper, through children's voices, through the soft glow of tree lights reflected in their eyes. Dad reached over and turned off the bedside lamp, plunging the room into a gentle darkness, broken only by the faintest glow from the snow outside. The house sank fully into rest now. Pipes hummed quietly. The wind whispered against the outside walls. The tree downstairs stood silently, a tall silhouette filled with memories. The dining room table, now clear and waiting for the morning, reflected the faint moonlight in its smooth surface. Everything in the house seemed to sigh softly, not from tiredness, but from fulfillment. As Mom drifted into sleep, she thought of the small moments that had made the day special, the first flash of joy in the children's eyes, the scent of the tree, the warmth of dinner, the stories shared beside the soft glow of the radio. Dad's thoughts wandered too, resting on the familiar sounds of laughter, on the sight of children curled up contentedly on the rug, on the simple comfort of being surrounded by people he loved. Sleep came gently. Nothing hurried, nothing forced, just the natural end to a day filled with warmth. And as the night deepened outside, as snow settled softly on branches and rooftops, the house held on to the last glow of Christmas. It was a glow made not of lights or decorations, but of memory. The kind of memory that stays with you for years. The kind that rises again whenever you see a tree blinking softly in a dim room, or smell the faint aroma of holiday spices drifting through the air. Christmas Day, in the 1,950 seconds, did not end with fireworks or grand finales. It ended with quiet, with stillness, with the soft peace of a family resting after a day that had unfolded with gentle joy from morning to night. A peaceful, lingering kind of joy that remained, like a warm ember, long after the house had fallen asleep. And so, as we step back from this long, gentle journey through a 1,950 seconds Christmas, the echoes of the day linger like the last warm embers of a fire, slowly settling into a quiet glow. We have walked through the icy dawn and felt the soft thrill of children tiptoeing toward the tree. We have watched the lights shimmer on heavy glass ornaments, heard the laughter around the breakfast table, and followed the steady rhythm of family rituals woven through a day that never rushed itself. We have stood in doorways as neighbors arrived with warm wishes, listened to old stories retold in soft voices, and witnessed the small, meaningful moments that made even the simplest traditions shine. The feast, the games, The late evening quiet, the muffled sounds of a house winding down, all of it formed a tapestry of gentle wonder, the kind that makes a holiday not just memorable, but timeless. And in those final quiet moments, with the tree lights fading and the house settling into sleep, we were reminded that the true heart of Christmas was not in the perfection of the decorations or the grandeur of the gifts. It lived in the stillness, the closeness, the warmth, shared across a room on a winter night. It lived in the tiny rituals, the gentle laughter, the soft glow reflected in each face. These memories, even decades later, continue to warm the edges of our imagination, reminding us of a time when joy moved slowly and simply, like snow drifting through the air. So, as we close our story tonight, I hope you carry a little of that warmth with you, the quiet magic of a Christmas long ago, wrapped in softness, simplicity, and the steady comfort of being together. Thank you for spending this peaceful moment with me. Chúc bạn một buổi tối thật nhẹ nhàng, and wherever you are, I hope your night is calm, warm, and deeply restful. Good night, my friend.